Back chair now recognize himself for 5 minutes. Mr. Dettelbach, are you troubled by the rule? I mean, you told him one thing 10 years ago, and now you're directly contradicting that.
The stabilizing brace short barrel rifle rule, I assume, is the rule you're referring to.
I'm referring to the letter that was sent back on November 26, 2012, that Mr. Nell's referenced in his first line of questioning, where
Sure.
you told the FTB finds that the submitted brace, when attached to a firearm, does not convert the weapon and would not alter its classification. Now you're doing just the opposite.
We have been public and in the rulemaking itself have detailed that history, and there were inconsistencies. However, there was also a situation, Mr. Chairman, where people were marketing products that had never been presented to ATF, saying that they were ATF
Was that the only time you
approved.
told them? The only time you told the American people that it was okay?
No, we look at specific
Let me read
products.
Let me read this letter, March 5th, 2014, because this doesn't so much focus on the brace, focus on how the weapon's used. And we have determined that firing a pistol from the shoulder would not cause the pistol to be reclassified as a short-barreled rifle. We do not classify weapons based on how individuals use the weapon. So you told them not once, but twice that it was okay. And I'm just asking, does it bother you now that you're making the change that's going to impact millions of Americans?
The rule was necessary in part because it needed to address inconsistency so that people could understand the definition of a
I
short
just read
barrel
two
rifle.
letters that were consistent. Both of them said it was fine.
There were other letters that were not.
Has the ATF ever found itself in this position where a rule change directly contradicts what you've told American citizens was okay, and that's going to impact millions of law-abiding citizens? Have you ever found yourself in that situation?
Respectfully, I don't believe that's I agree
Millions
with that
of
summary of where we are.
Millions of Americans aren't going to be impacted?
There were specific products that get presented for classification. Those products then sometimes change. They're not the same ones that are marketed. And there was inconsistency. The market is dynamic. It was necessary to do what notice and comment rulemaking, I think, is a better way to do that.
I think millions of Americans think the inconsistency is with the ATF because you told them one thing and now you're changing it. What happens on May 31st?
According to the rule.
No, what happens on May 31st?
According to the rule, people have, from the date the rule was published until that date, to do one of several things. They can either detach the brace from the firearm and keep both, and they can attach that brace to another one.
They got to remove or destroy the brace, get a longer barrel, turn in or destroy the firearm, or register the firearm. Is that right? They got to do one of those four things.
They have to apply to register whether or not the application is ruled on. They're allowed to keep the item during that entire time so that they're not held accountable.
If they don't
for any
do
waiting
that
period.
and the timeline runs out, what happens to those individuals? They don't do those four things and the timeline is expired. What happens then?
I assume that people who are aware.
I'm not asking. What happens if they don't do those four things?
I think that, Mr. Chairman, as a prosecutor, I just want to be accurate. What happens, former prosecutor, what happens is, depending on the circumstance, if a person is unaware, right, they're not going to be prosecuted for things that they're unaware of.
Let's cut to the chase. They could be a felon, right?
Well,
they could be a felon.
It depends on the facts and circumstances of each case. And of course, we would prioritize enforcement on gang members who are having these items and shooting
You mentioned
people.
enforcement. How are you going to enforce this?
With
You're going to go to gun ranges?
What we will do is
You're going to go to manufacturers and look at the risk of people they sold braces to?
What we will do is when we do a search warrant in a drug case and we discover an unlawful item, whether it's a machine gun or a Glock switch or a short-barreled rifle that doesn't comply, we will consider that as one of the charges. There's no plan.
Does the Gun Control Act or the National Firearms Act clearly and unambiguously prohibit pistol braces?
It doesn't prohibit anything. It calls for increased controls on short-barreled rifles.
Not the gun control, but I'm just reading from the court decision yesterday in the Sixth Circuit where the judge said the statute does not clearly and unambiguously prohibit bump stocks. The court went on to say for a decade the ATF has maintained that a bump stock is not a machine gun part, and the court said the ATF's own flip-flop on this position is one of the reasons why they ruled in favor of those opposing the rule you guys made. Seems to me we're in the same situation here. And yesterday, the Sixth Circuit gave us a strong ruling on the bump stock issue. I would anticipate that we're going to get other strong rulings on this issue as well. With that, the Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's interesting that my Republican colleagues are concerned about how we enforce things when most of the bills we've been voting on in this session are completely unworkable. Just last week, Republicans held a 12-hour markup on a cruel immigration bill aimed at what they're calling the, quote, crisis at the border. But we haven't done anything in this committee to actually meaningfully address the issues at hand. And one major push factor is violence in the region, which is fueled by American firearms. The United States is the #1 source of semi-automatic weapons in El Salvador. About 500,000 guns are trafficked to Mexico from the U.S. every year, and 70 to 90% of guns recovered at crime scenes in Mexico are traced back to the United States. So the crisis of gun violence in the United States and our lack of gun regulations is spreading to other countries. That is the real crisis at our borders. Director Dettelbach, thank you for being here. These gun trafficking numbers are alarming. And the ATF plays a vital role in tracing and recovering guns that are used in crimes to fight the proliferation of gun violence and gun trafficking. From 2017 to 2021, the ATF traced close to 2 million guns in crimes, and yet some of my Republican colleagues actually want to eliminate the ATF. So how does the ATF currently fight gun trafficking, especially trafficking to Mexico and other countries to the south of us?
In trying to effectualize our public safety mission as a small agency with a big job, we try to bring tools to that. And the two tools that we bring to the problems you're talking about are partnership with our state and local law enforcement and crime gun intelligence. What crime gun intelligence, whether that's our tracing ability for crime guns, or whether it's the NIBIN system to connect crimes together where a common firearm is used, can do, is it can enable us to try to identify where the crime guns are coming from, how they're moving from lawful commerce into the black market under unlawful commerce, and target our resources to do that. That's not limited to, but it certainly includes gun traffic that flows south over the border. We have at ATF a group of firearms trafficking task forces, that are focused on the southwest border. And every day we are working to try to interdict the flow of firearms unlawfully from commerce to south, including to places like the cartels.
So eliminating the ATF would have enormous consequences for that work. The Bipartisan Safer Communities Act contained the Stop Illegal Trafficking in Firearms Act, which made it an explicit federal crime to act as a straw purchaser for firearms and establishes penalties for those transferring a firearm they have reason to believe will be used in a crime. The ATF's work recently led to the first gun trafficking conviction under the new law this February. How would repeal of that law or defunding of the ATF, including the anti-firearms trafficking campaign, as proposed by Republicans, impact gun trafficking?
Congress passed the Bipartisan Safer Communities Act, and as you say, they gave us not one but two new criminal statutes, a straw purchasing statute for the first time ever, a standalone, and a firearms trafficking felony. We are working with state and local law enforcement every day to bring those cases. We've brought I think over 30, including the one that you referred to in Texas, 231 firearms being trafficked south of the border. And these cases take time and effort and expertise to investigate. And so to implement those laws, to enforce them, ATF needs to have the resources to be able to do those investigations, to follow through, and to take people who are criminals supplying crime guns, not the law-abiding citizens, but supplying crime guns to criminals and take them out of that business.
Thank you for that work. The second volume of National Firearms Commerce and Trafficking Assessment found that over 1 million guns were stolen from private residences from 2017 to 2021, and that these stolen guns make up a substantial portion of guns that are eventually trafficked and used in crimes. I have proposed the Safe Gun Storage Act, which requires strong standards for firearm storage devices to prevent unintended use and theft. But sadly, my colleagues across the aisle oppose even this sensible gun safety measure. Could safe gun storage or other common sense gun legislation stop the large flow of firearms across the United States borders into other countries, or at least substantially help with that issue?
I talk about the issue of safe storage often. And the way I try to communicate, because I think this is something we can have consensus on, is that there is a right to bear arms in this country, but people should understand there's a responsibility to safely secure your firearm. And it means a lot to you. It's an important right. So why wouldn't you try to secure it? Firearms that are stolen from cars and parking lots at malls are not used to hunt or for self-protection. They end up at crime scenes in the next community or in your community to hurt people. I would just encourage everybody to do what your local police chief, sheriff, ATF, SAC says, which is please think ahead and just act responsibly and secure your firearms. It's what everybody wants, and real people in our communities are getting hurt by just carelessness.
Thank you.
Time of the
I yield back.
gentlelady's expired.